In a land torn by faith and conquest, one king rose as a symbol of resilience and determination, embodying hope amidst adversity. Baldwin IV, the Leper King of Jerusalem, ruled not with the strength of his body, but with the power of his mind and spirit. Diagnosed with leprosy as a child, his reign seemed destined for tragedy. Yet against all odds, this young ruler not only defended Jerusalem, but triumphed against the greatest military leader of his time, Saladin. Baldwin's story is one of defiance against the odds, the warrior king who turned frailty into fortitude. Much of what we know of Baldwin's life comes from the writings of William of Tyre, a scholar and chronicler who witnessed these tumultuous times. William's narratives present the Leper King not merely as a monarch, but as an individual confronting remarkable adversities, revealing a figure of considerable distinction through his documentation. Inspired by William's writings, we delve into the life and legacy of a king who defied the odds and left an indelible mark on history. This journey invites you to reconsider what you thought you knew about the Crusades, their heroes, their ideals, and to challenge the romanticized image of the Templars as noble warriors. History, as you will see, is rarely simple, and its truths are far more complex than legend. In 1163, the marriage of Amalric I, King of Jerusalem, and Agnes of Courtenay was annulled. The stated reason was consanguinity, a union too close by blood. But beneath the surface lay the kingdom's political currents, where alliances and perceptions held more sway than love or family. Agnes, now separated from her children, returned to the Courtenay stronghold in Nablus, where her family retained significant influence. For Baldwin and his sister Sibylla, this marked an early separation from their mother and the start of lives shaped by politics and succession. Born in 1161, Baldwin IV grew up in a world of faith and conflict. As the son of Amalric I, King of Jerusalem, and Agnes of Courtenay, Baldwin's destiny was to inherit a kingdom on the front lines of the Crusades. But his life took a harrowing turn when, during his childhood, his tutor, William of Tyre, noticed something troubling.
I devoted myself to my royal pupil with vigilant care and watched over him with the solicitude befitting his exalted position. I endeavored to train him in the formation of character, as well as to instruct him in the knowledge of letters. He was playing one day with his companions of noble rank, when they began, as playful boys often do, to pinch each other's arms and hands with their nails. The other boys gave evidence of pain by their outcries, but Baldwin, although his comrades did not spare him, endured it altogether too patiently, as if he felt nothing. At first, I suppose that it proceeded from his capacity for endurance and not from lack of sensitiveness. But when I called him and began to inquire what it meant, I discovered that his right arm and hand were partially numb, so that he did not feel pinching or even biting in the least. I began to be uneasy, remembering the words of the wise man. There is no question that a member which is without feeling detracts greatly from the health of the body, and one who does not realize he is sick is in danger.
While watching Baldwin at play, William observed that the young prince showed no reaction to pain in his right hand, even when pinched or bitten during games. This loss of sensation raised alarm, prompting William to seek answers. In the culturally diverse Kingdom of Jerusalem, where physicians from across the Mediterranean and Islamic world often exchanged knowledge, a team of doctors was consulted to evaluate Baldwin's condition. Repeated treatments, ranging from fomentations to oil rubs, were carried out in an attempt to help him. Yet these early symptoms were harbingers of a serious and incurable disease that would become unmistakable in time. As Baldwin IV grew, the shadow of leprosy loomed ever larger, marking his face and extremities with the unmistakable signs of the disease. Yet his spirit remained unbroken. He immersed himself in the pursuit of knowledge, his keen intellect and retentive memory earning the admiration of those around him. Despite his halting speech, Baldwin's words carried weight, and his love for history and conversation revealed a mind both sharp and reflective. His father's influence was evident in his mannerisms, his walk, and even the tones of his voice, a resemblance that endeared him to his followers. Though his body betrayed him, Baldwin's determination to master the art of horsemanship and his skill in handling them spoke of a young man who refused to be defined by his illness. His advisors, moved by his resilience, saw in him the promise of a leader who could inspire hope in a kingdom beset by challenges. In May 1174, the death of Nur al-Din, a formidable leader of the Muslim forces, created an opportunity for Amalric I to strengthen the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Gathering his forces, Amalric launched a campaign against the city of Banyas, determined to tip the balance of power. For 15 days the siege persisted. Amalric's forces strained against the city's defenders, but with time, resistance grew stronger, and illness began to take its toll on the king. Banyas' defenders, led by Nur al-Din's widow, proposed peace and a ransom. Though reluctant, Amalric eventually agreed, securing money and the release of 20 captive knights. But victory came at a cost. On the journey home, the king's condition worsened. After dismissing his forces, Amalric traveled to Jerusalem, battling dysentery and fever that grew more severe with each passing day. Desperate for relief, physicians of Greek, Syrian, and Latin traditions were consulted, administering remedies to ease his suffering. Though treatments gave the king brief respite, his strength was too far spent. On July 11, 1174, Amalric I passed away at the age of 38, leaving behind a kingdom in mourning and a throne without a ruler. Amalric was laid to rest within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the burial place of Jerusalem's kings. A man of wisdom and discretion, his leadership had steered the kingdom through uncertain times. As the kingdom grieved, eyes turned to Amalric's heir, a boy of 13, burdened not only with a crown, but with the unrelenting shadow of leprosy. The future of Jerusalem now rested in Baldwin IV's hands. In the heart of Jerusalem, 4 days after the death of King Amalric, the nobles and clergy convened within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Their decision was unanimous. Young Baldwin would take the throne, offering hope and continuity to a fragile realm. At just 13 years old, the boy stepped forward as both heir and guardian of the kingdom. Though yet untouched by outward signs of his illness, he carried within him a burden far greater than most could imagine, the weight of kingship and the silent spectre of leprosy. On July 15, 1174, Baldwin IV was consecrated and crowned at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, Jerusalem, in a ceremony steeped in tradition and solemnity. This act of unity declared to all that, despite uncertainty, Jerusalem's leaders stood strong in their faith and purpose. Baldwin's youth belied a quiet determination that inspired those around him. In his calm demeanor, they found a symbol of resilience and courage, a leader ready to face the trials ahead. Emerging into the bright sunlight of Jerusalem, he carried not only the weight of kingship, but also the hopes of his people, as the echoes of bells rang out a message of endurance and resolve. In his hour of triumph, Baldwin was not alone. His mother, Agnes of Courtenay, had now re-entered his life, ready to stand by his side. Though her earlier absence had shaped his childhood, Agnes returned as a key figure in his court, offering counsel and unwavering loyalty. her influence would prove both a shield and a source of contention in the turbulent years to come. For Baldwin, the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. Yet with Agnes by his side, he would face the trials of kingship with the steadfast support of a mother who understood the stakes of power. In August 1174, less than 2 months into the new King of Jerusalem's reign, the Sicilian fleet, sent by King William II, suffered a devastating loss during the Battle of Alexandria. Poor leadership and lack of caution led to heavy casualties and the fleet's humiliating retreat, marking a failed attempt to challenge Saladin's power in Egypt. While external threats loomed, internal tensions threatened the stability of Jerusalem. Milon de Plancy, trusted by King Amalric and now controlling the affairs of state, drew the ire of the realm's barons. His monopolization of power and exclusion of the nobility created deep divisions within the court. Raymond III, Count of Tripoli, stepped forward to challenge the status quo. As Baldwin's closest living male relative, Raymond declared his claim to the regency, citing his loyalty to King Amalric, his wealth and power, and his unwavering devotion to the crown. Surely he should be the one to rule until the young boy came of age at 15 years old. Raymond's appeal won favor among the majority of the kingdom's leadership. From bishops to knights, many rallied to his cause. Yet, despite the widespread support, a resolution was deferred. The decision on the regency remained suspended, further heightening tensions within the court. For Baldwin, the first year of his reign was a crucible of challenges. The loss at Alexandria and the struggles for regency revealed the fragile state of a kingdom seeking to navigate both internal strife and external threats. On October 1174, in the simmering streets of the port city of Acre, tensions in the Kingdom of Jerusalem boiled over. Milon de Plancy, still the de facto regent for King Baldwin, had drawn the ire of the barons with his arrogance and unchecked authority. His rule bred resentment that would culminate in a shocking act of violence. Once a trusted confidant of King Amalric, Milon's presumption of power and disdain for the nobility had made him enemies in every corner of the realm. As dusk fell over Acre, the tensions he had ignored came to a deadly head. Ambushed by unknown assailants, Milon was struck down in the public streets. His death was as ignominious as his conduct had been arrogant, a shocking end for the man who had once held the reins of the kingdom. With Milon gone, the balance of power shifted yet again. Among the barons and clergy, many viewed his assassination as an inevitability, a consequence of his own hubris. The power vacuum he left behind created an opportunity for Count Raymond of Tripoli to solidify his claim to the regency. For Baldwin IV, the death of his regent marked yet another challenge in a reign that had barely begun. The kingdom, already fragile, faced new uncertainties as leaders vied for control in the shadow of Milon's fall. With Milon de Plancy's sudden and violent death, the Kingdom of Jerusalem needed a steady hand to guide its young king. Among the barons, one figure stood apart. The choice was obvious to all: Raymond III, Count of Tripoli, closest in kin to Baldwin, renowned for his wealth, wisdom, and loyalty, emerged as the natural choice for regent. Raymond was a man of keen intellect and immense pragmatism. A patron of learning, he valued counsel and sought understanding in both governance and battle. Yet his regency would not go unchallenged, as the kingdom's fractious nobility tested his patience at every turn. Raymond took on the role of guardian and advisor to the young king with wisdom and resolve. Baldwin, precocious and eager to learn, found in Raymond a leader willing to foster his development. Together they sought to stabilize a kingdom caught between internal divisions and external pressures. Raymond's regency unfolded against a backdrop of mounting threats. Saladin's growing strength loomed over the Crusader states, while within Jerusalem the barons' rivalries continued to simmer just below the surface. In truth, it was a delicate balance, requiring a deft hand to navigate. Indeed, it could be said that the regency was both an honor and a burden. Raymond's decisions would shape the course of the kingdom and the reign of a young king destined to face challenges that no ruler had encountered before. In the same year that Baldwin ascended the throne, events unfolded in Syria that would forever change the balance of power. Saladin, summoned by the leaders of Damascus, left Egypt in the care of his brother and hastened to claim the city. After the death of Nur ad-Din, the once ruler of Damascus, the city faced increasing instability. The leaders of Damascus had invited Saladin to take control, recognizing his growing power and leadership in the region. Welcomed by the people, Saladin secured the city without a fight. From there he advanced through Coele-Syria, and one by one its cities, Baalbek, Homs, Hama, and Shazar, opened their gates to him. Each surrender brought Saladin closer to uniting the fragmented Muslim states under his banner. To the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem, his growing power was a threat they simply could not ignore. Confronting Saladin's growing influence required swift action. Raymond III, leading an army drawn from both Jerusalem and the county of Tripoli, marched into Coele-Syria, not to seek battle, but to position the Crusaders strategically and contain Saladin's ambitions. William of Tyre made mention of the Crusaders' growing unease and determination in his Chronicles.
For so powerfully has he risen against us by land and by sea, that if the dayspring from on high had not mercifully visited us, we should have no hope of resisting. It seemed wiser to lend aid to the boy king who was not yet of age, not that some show of kindness might be displayed toward him for his own sake, but to encourage him as an adversary against our distrusted rival, Saladin, that the latter's plans might be hindered and his attacks against the kingdom rendered less effective.
For the Crusaders, the boy king was not merely a symbol of continuity, he was their last line of defense against a rising power that threatened to overshadow them all. This was no campaign of conquest or open warfare. Raymond's march into Coele-Syria was a calculated move, designed to slow Saladin's advance and signal to their adversary that the Kingdom of Jerusalem would not yield without resistance. The stage was now set for a prolonged struggle. While Saladin fortified his position, the Kingdom of Jerusalem braced for the challenge of facing an adversary as wise and resourceful as he was powerful. By 1174, Saladin had emerged as the most formidable leader in the Muslim world. Uniting territories from Egypt to Damascus, he commanded vast resources, an unyielding military force, and the loyalty of nations ready to follow his every command. While his power grew, the Christian kingdoms of the East faced mounting challenges. Divided by internal strife and weakened by complacency, they found themselves ill-prepared for the storm on the horizon. The gravity of their situation did not go unnoticed by William of Tyre.
All the kingdoms round about us obey one ruler, they do the will of one man, and at his command alone, however reluctantly, they are ready, as a unit, to take up arms for our injury. From Egypt and the countries adjacent to it, he draws an inestimable supply of the purest gold. Men thirsty for that gold gather under his banner.
The Crusader leadership in Jerusalem recognized the magnitude of the threat before them. Raymond III, seasoned and pragmatic, called for action once again, not to face Saladin in open battle, but to strategically position their forces and slow his advance as before. Gathering soldiers from the Kingdom of Jerusalem and the county of Tripoli, Raymond led his army to the district of Gallifa. There, near the city of Arca, they set camp, not to conquer, but to stand as a bulwark against Saladin's ambitions. This was a campaign of caution and strategy, an acknowledgement of the delicate balance between resistance and survival. Saladin, wise in counsel and relentless in ambition, loomed as an adversary unlike any they had faced before. In this moment, the Crusader states stood at a crossroads. The unity and strength of their enemy contrasted sharply with their own divisions. As William of Tyre so starkly observed, their struggle was as much against themselves as it was against the gathering storm of Saladin's empire. In 1175, the Muslim world faced a turning point. Saladin, a leader rising from humble beginnings, continued to unify fractured territories under his command. With Nur ad-Din gone, his young son's claim to Aleppo hung in the balance. Rallying against Saladin's ambitions, Nur ad-Din's brother Qutb al-Din, Lord of Mosul, marshaled his forces to defend his nephew and uphold the Zengid dynasty's legacy. As Saladin's conquests swept through the region, capturing cities like Hama and Shazar, the defenders of Homs pleaded for Crusader support. The Christians, led by Raymond III of Tripoli, hesitated, balancing the promise of rewards against the risks of intervention. Uncertainty loomed over the Crusader leaders in their camp near Tripoli. Assisting the defenders of Homs might risk direct confrontation with Saladin's forces, an outcome they could not afford. Ultimately, they chose withdrawal over commitment. Seeing the Crusaders pull back, Saladin, aided by betrayal from within, seized the moment. In a fierce battle, his forces overwhelmed Qutb al-Din's army, who were stationed there to protect the greater Zengid dynasty. With victory in hand, Saladin entered Homs and claimed the citadel, cementing his dominance. Saladin then extended an olive branch to the Crusaders. He proposed a treaty, offering the release of hostages, including those tied to Raymond III and Renaud of Sidon, in exchange for their non-interference in his campaign against Nur ad-Din's family. Raymond III accepted the terms, securing the freedom of his people without payment. Yet not all agreed with this decision. Humphrey of Toron, who mediated the negotiations, faced accusations of undue closeness to Saladin. Critics feared the treaty would embolden an adversary whose strength already loomed large. For Saladin, diplomacy and dominance intertwined seamlessly. Each victory brought him closer to his ultimate goal, while the Crusaders returned home with questions that lingered longer than their triumphs. While the kingdoms waged their battles on the fields, a quieter milestone unfolded within the church. On June 8th, by unanimous consent of clergy and people alike, William of Tyre, the primary source of this very history episode, ascended to the dignity of Metropolitan of Tyre. Consecrated at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, his role expanded from chronicler to shepherd of his city's spiritual life. In 1174, as Saladin's attention was fixed on Aleppo, Baldwin IV seized an opportunity. The land of Damascus lay exposed, its defenses thin and its people unaware of what was to come. Baldwin, a mere 13 years old, led his forces into the heart of this vulnerable land. Fields were burned, barns ransacked, and homes razed to the ground. The farmers, retreating with their families to fortified towns, could only watch helplessly as their livelihood went up in flames. At the village of Bedeguine, even resistance was futile. The Crusaders, relentless in their advance, claimed both victory and spoils, leaving nothing but ash and ruin in their wake. Laden with plunder, they retreated to their strongholds, unchallenged and triumphant. The following summer, Baldwin led another raid, this time deeper into enemy territory. Joining forces with Raymond III of Tripoli, they turned their sights on the people and bountiful valley of Bakar, fertile, flourishing, and utterly unprepared for what was about to come their way. Like wolves among sheep, they ravaged the land. The valley's inhabitants, forewarned of the Crusaders' approach, fled to the mountains with what little they could carry. But their homes and fields were not so lucky. United, Baldwin and Raymond roamed the valley without opposition. Their conquests, though temporary, were devastating, stripping the land of its resources and leaving its people destitute. At last, resistance came. Shams al-Dawla, Saladin's brother, gathered an army and marched to face the Crusaders. What followed was a bloody battle, fought fiercely on both sides. Though Shams al-Dawla fought valiantly, his forces were overwhelmed. The Crusaders, their victory assured, returned home laden with spoils. The valley they left behind bore the scars of their conquest, its wealth stolen, its people scattered by so-called holy warriors. Amidst these campaigns, news spread of ransom and redemption. Renaud de Chatillon, the former Prince of Antioch, who had spent 15 years imprisoned in Aleppo after a disastrous raid, and Jocelyn of Edessa, the king's uncle and seneschal of Jerusalem, captured over a decade earlier at the Battle of Harim, were finally released. Their freedom was bought with gold and unwavering determination, and both men returned to wield influence once more in the volatile Crusader states. While the swords of the kingdom carved paths of destruction, the Church sought to restore order amidst the chaos. In the sacred halls of Tyre, bishops were anointed, their prayers offered for a land torn by war and ambition. In 1176, Emperor Manuel I Komnenos of Constantinople set out on a grand campaign, determined to defend Christendom and crush the formidable power of the Sultanate of Iconium. With an army so vast it seemed limitless, he sought to expand the Christian name against the Turks who opposed it. Yet what began as a righteous crusade unraveled into disaster. Misguided by their officers, the imperial forces were lured into treacherous, narrow terrain, already seized by the enemy. What followed was an absolute massacre. The Turks, taking full advantage of the terrain, unleashed a devastating ambush. Thousands perished, including the emperor's nephew, John the Protosebastos, a man of great renown and familial pride, whose daughter Maria had wed King Amalric I. Manuel himself escaped the slaughter, rallying the remnants of his shattered army back to safety. But the weight of this calamity left an indelible mark upon the emperor. No longer the joyous, spirited leader he had been, Manuel returned to Constantinople a changed man. Haunted by the memory of that day, he withdrew into grief. His once vibrant health faded, and the shadow of defeat lingered over him until the end of his days. The disaster at Iconium was not just a military loss. It was a scar etched into the soul of an emperor. It serves as a reminder of the perilous weight of leadership, where even the noblest intentions can falter against the tides of human error. In October 1176, Marquis William Longsword of Montferrat arrived in the port of Sidon, summoned by King Baldwin and the barons of the Crusader Kingdom. His purpose was clear: to forge a powerful alliance through marriage to the king's elder sister, Sibylla. Their union, meticulously arranged a year earlier, was sealed with solemn oaths. As part of the marriage, William was granted the maritime cities of Jaffa and Ascalon, securing his place within the kingdom. Yet, not all welcomed the match, and voices of dissent began to stir. William was a man of striking appearance and strong lineage, connected to the kings of France and the emperors of Rome. Generous, bold, and skilled in arms, he was every inch the knightly figure the kingdom needed. But his temper and love of indulgence hinted at the flawed humanity beneath the grandeur. Barely 3 months after the wedding, though, tragedy struck. William fell gravely ill, his strength failing him despite his young age. In June 1177, as King Baldwin himself struggled with illness, William succumbed, leaving Sibylla pregnant and alone. William's death was a blow to the kingdom, cutting short the promise of stability his marriage had offered. Sibylla now carried their child, later named Baldwin V. Around the same time, another union was formed between Humphrey of Toron and Philippa, daughter of Prince Raymond of Antioch. But their joy was fleeting. Illness claimed Philippa's life within days, and Humphrey barely survived the same ailment. These marriages were not mere celebrations, they were acts of survival. In a kingdom surrounded by enemies and plagued by uncertainty, every alliance, every union, carried the weight of an entire realm. In the 4th year of his reign, Baldwin IV, though just 16 years old, bore the immense responsibility of a kingdom upon his frail frame. His leprosy, once concealed, was now unmistakable, leaving his body fragile, but his spirit unyielding. Hope arrived on the tides in August 1177 as Philip, Count of Flanders, landed at the port of Acre. His arrival had been eagerly awaited, for the Crusader kingdoms believed him to be their very salvation. In desperation, Baldwin and his court offered Philip unprecedented power, the general administration of the kingdom, command in war, and full jurisdiction over its treasures. Yet Philip declined, professing his devotion to divine service rather than political authority. But Philip's true motives soon became clear. In defiance of kinship and hospitality, the Count sought to supplant Baldwin by marrying his sister Sibylla and positioning himself as the kingdom's de facto ruler. For Baldwin, still a boy yet marked by both illness and kingship, the betrayal cut deep. While he bore his suffering with dignity, the duplicity of those he welcomed into his realm revealed the precariousness of his position. In response, Baldwin turned to a trusted ally. Renaud de Chatillon, seasoned by years of captivity and proven loyalty, was named regent and commander of the army, ensuring the kingdom's survival as Baldwin's strength slowly began to wane. Even as his body betrayed him, Baldwin's mind remained sharp and his heart steadfast. Surrounded by intrigue and the ambitions of others, the boy king stood as a symbol of resilience in a kingdom struggling to hold its ground. In 1177, as King Baldwin IV lay weakened by illness inside the walls of Jerusalem, the cracks within the Crusader kingdom grew ever deeper. Philip, Count of Flanders, who had been hailed as a savior upon his arrival, revealed ambitions that threatened to tear the realm apart. Encouraged by his companions, Philip still sought to secure the throne through marriage to Sibylla, the king's pregnant sister. The scheme, orchestrated by the advocate of Bethune and Count William de Mandeville, promised power and lands in exchange for the union. Baldwin's advisers, ever loyal to their young king, resisted fiercely. They upheld the customs of mourning and refused to consider Sibylla's remarriage so soon after her husband's death. Their steadfastness laid bare the Count's ambitions, angering him greatly. With his designs fully exposed, Philip's resentment boiled over. The unity of the kingdom, already fragile, was further tested by his attempts to undermine Baldwin's authority and the integrity of the royal line. At just 16 years old, Baldwin bore the weight of these divisions with remarkable composure. Despite his physical frailty, his mind remained sharp, and his resolve to protect the kingdom never wavered. The kingdom stood firm for now, but the seeds of division were sown. The Crusader kingdoms, surrounded by powerful enemies, could ill afford such internal discord. Yet, the ambitions of men continued to chip away at their fragile unity. A kingdom so thoroughly divided cannot stand for long. As external threats loomed ever larger, the Crusaders' greatest enemy might yet prove to be themselves. In late 1177, a delegation from Constantinople arrived in Jerusalem, led by Lord Andronicus Angelus. Sent by Emperor Manuel Komnenos, their mission was clear: to enforce the treaty binding Byzantium and the Crusader kingdom in a joint campaign against Egypt. The ambassador's plea was urgent. Delay, they warned, would endanger the campaign's success. But hope had already begun to crumble. Philip of Flanders, the kingdom's so-called savior, again revealed himself to be anything but. Citing unfamiliarity with Egypt and the seasonal flooding of the Nile, Philip declared the campaign ill-advised. His objections were met with solutions: fleets of ships, caravans of camels, and supplies for the journey, all rejected by the Count. It became clear that Philip was making excuses. His dismissal of the campaign, despite the kingdom's assurances, betrayed a lack of commitment to the Crusader cause. Baldwin, though physically weakened, refused to let Philip's duplicity dictate the fate of his realm. The treaty stood as a testament to the kingdom's unity with Byzantium, a unity now strained by the Count's refusal to act. In a final act of arrogance, Philip suggested abandoning the plan altogether, opting instead for a campaign better suited to his army's preferences. His betrayal of the kingdom's trust was complete. The failure to launch the Egyptian campaign dealt a bitter blow to the Crusader kingdom's alliance with Byzantium. For Baldwin, it was another betrayal, one that further isolated his fragile kingdom amid a sea of enemies. In the face of Philip's obstinacy, the imperial envoys remained resolute. 70 Byzantine galleys waited in the port of Acre, ready to support the campaign against Egypt. To delay further, they warned, would risk not only the alliance with Byzantium, but also the wrath of Emperor Manuel. For Baldwin and his court, the choice was clear. Bound by honor and necessity, they resolved to respect the treaty and move forward with preparations for the campaign. When Philip learned of their decision, his reaction was swift and furious. Declaring the plan an insult to him personally, he forced another delay, postponing the expedition until late spring. His obligations ostensibly fulfilled, Philip departed Jerusalem for Tripoli, his actions casting doubt over his intentions. Despite Philip's reluctance and wavering loyalty, Baldwin IV once again demonstrated his commitment to unity within the Crusader states. As a gesture of goodwill, the young king provided Philip with a contingent of 100 knights and 2,000 foot soldiers. This act was not just a strategic move, but a reflection of Baldwin's relentless efforts to preserve alliances even amid discord. Days later, Philip sent envoys back to the court, claiming he was now prepared to follow the campaign wherever it might lead. This sudden reversal drew raised eyebrows and whispers of discontent. Philip's frequent changes of heart and refusal to commit revealed an unstable character unfit for leadership. Unbeknownst to the court, Philip's wavering was no mere indecision. Hoping to sow discord, he sought to cast the Crusaders as the cause of the delay, ready to report to the European princes that they alone were at fault. Around this time, Baldwin of Ibelin, a loyal vassal and formidable knight, was joined in marriage to Queen Maria, the widow of King Almeric. This union, sanctioned by Baldwin, strengthened the ties among the kingdom's nobility. Along with his new title, Baldwin received the city of Nablus as part of Maria's dowry, a symbol of the stability the marriage sought to ensure during these uncertain times. As the Byzantines prepared for war and Baldwin's kingdom labored under mounting tension, one thing was clear. Philip of Flanders had proven to be more of a liability than an ally, his every action weakening the fragile unity of the Crusader effort. After arriving in Tripoli, Philip of Flanders and the Count of Tripoli completed their preparations for the march. Together, they led their troops into enemy territory near the cities of Hims and Hama, located in central Syria along the Orontes River, where they faced little resistance. The countryside lay largely undefended, allowing the Crusaders to advance and inflict losses on the enemy. However, fortified towns remained well supplied and heavily guarded. The Prince of Antioch, following an agreed-upon route, joined the Allied forces to strengthen their campaign. The united army then turned its focus to the fortress of Harim. Located in the territory of Chalchis and now known as Artasium, Harim stood as one of the last strongholds of the son of Nuruddin. The Allied forces surrounded the fortress, establishing a complete blockade on all sides. Siege engines and machines were swiftly constructed, battering Harim's walls without pause. To prepare for the approaching winter, the Crusaders built huts from osiers and fortified their camp against torrential rains, ensuring their supplies and positions remained secure. Provisions were brought in from Antioch and neighboring areas, with the local Christian population working tirelessly to assist the Crusaders. Their combined efforts sustained the siege as the walls of Harim endured relentless attacks day and night. The fortress, controlled by Nuruddin's son and allowed by Saladin as his last defense in the area, faced significant pressure. The Crusaders continued their constant siege, but the result of the effort was uncertain as both sides contested for control. Far to the south, Saladin prepared his next move. Learning that the Crusader forces had advanced into Antioch, leaving the Kingdom of Jerusalem weakened, he saw an opportunity. With swift precision, Saladin gathered a vast army, equipping them better than ever before. Crossing the wilderness through forced marches, he arrived at Al-Arish, and from there his lighter troops swept onward, moving with speed toward Ascalon. Saladin's aim was clear: to force the Christians to abandon the siege of Harim or to claim victory over the defenseless kingdom. His confidence in his strategy was matched only by the size of his assembled forces. Yet Baldwin was not idle. At the age of 16, despite being physically affected by leprosy, he represented the determination of his kingdom. Receiving early warnings of Saladin's approach, Baldwin quickly mustered the remaining strength of Jerusalem. With diminished forces and ailing allies, the young king raced to Ascalon, determined to stand against the invader. Though many of Jerusalem's knights had marched north or fallen ill, Baldwin's determination remained unshaken. Leaving a small garrison to hold Ascalon, he led his army further into the plains, prepared to meet Saladin's forces head-on. Baldwin's commanders, seasoned in war, urged caution. The enemy's overwhelming numbers made direct battle perilous. Taking their advice, the Crusader forces held their position as skirmishes broke out through the day. But as night fell, prudence dictated a retreat to the safety of the city. Mistaking the Crusaders' calculated retreat for weakness, Saladin and his men succumbed to overconfidence. Believing victory within their grasp, they let caution fall away, spreading out in bands across the countryside and basking in their supposed dominance. It was a dangerous gamble, and one that could soon turn the tide of the conflict. As night fell, the Crusader forces in Ascalon expected Saladin's army to establish camp outside the city. But instead, Saladin unleashed chaos. His troops, divided into bands, scattered across the land, raiding and devastating with unchecked ferocity. Among Saladin's commanders was Javelino, an Armenian apostate of fearsome reputation. Leading his forces to Ramla, a poorly fortified city, he found it deserted. The terrified citizens had fled, some to Baldwin's army in Ascalon, others to the safety of Jaffa or the mountain stronghold of Mirabel. With no resistance, Javelino set the city ablaze, leaving behind ashes and ruin. Javelino's forces pushed onward to Lydda, surrounding the city and bombarding it with arrows and weapons of all kinds. The remaining inhabitants, desperate to survive, sought refuge in the Church of St. George, clutching at hope amidst relentless assault. Fear spread like wildfire. The plains lay desolate, with marauding bands advancing freely. Even the hills were not spared, as terrified villagers retreated to mountain strongholds. In Jerusalem itself, panic seized the citizens. Lacking confidence in the city's fortifications, many abandoned their homes and sought shelter in the Tower of David. Yet even in this dark hour, there remained a spark of hope. For though the enemy roamed unchecked, the faith of the people endured. As William of Tyre would later write,
"Even in his anger, he did not withhold his pity, nor did he forget mercy."
Word of devastation reached Ascalon. Saladin's forces roamed unchecked across the kingdom, spreading fire and chaos. Baldwin knew he could not remain idle. Faced with impossible odds, he chose to fight, declaring it was better to risk battle than to leave his people defenseless against slaughter and ruin. The young king once again led his forces from Ascalon, following the seashore to approach Saladin's camp with stealth. His small band of knights and foot soldiers advanced with purpose, joined by the Knights Templars, who had remained at Gaza under the leadership of Eudes de Saint-Amand. Still, their total strength barely reached 375. United by faith and the sight of the sacred cross, the Crusaders marched in battle formation. The fires dotting the plains and reports of massacred citizens steeled their resolve, and they pressed on with divine courage. Saladin, upon learning of the approaching Crusader army, felt unease. While confident in his vast numbers, he recalled his scattered forces and rallied his men for the coming clash. Drums rolled and trumpets sounded as his commanders worked to reassemble their lines. Baldwin's commanders, experienced in the art of war, drew up their forces with precision, aligning attackers and reserves. Against overwhelming numbers, their courage and discipline shone, a testament to their determination to avenge the suffering of their people. The two armies faced each other, the disparity in their strength stark. But Baldwin's resolve did not falter. United by faith and purpose, his men prepared for a confrontation that would test their mettle and their belief in divine intervention. The ranks of both armies closed in, and the Battle of Mons-Guissard had begun. At first, the outcome seemed uncertain as the forces clashed, uneven in strength and numbers. Yet, as the fighting raged on, the Christians, emboldened by divine grace, pressed forward with unwavering determination. Against all odds, the Crusaders broke through Saladin's lines, sowing chaos in the enemy ranks. The massacre that followed was devastating, and Saladin's forces, overwhelmed and scattered, were forced into a desperate retreat. At the heart of Saladin's army were his elite Mamluks, warriors raised and trained to protect their lord. Fiercely loyal, they fought to the death in his defense, ensuring his escape even as the rest of the army fled. The Christians, fueled by their newfound strength, chased the retreating enemy from Mons-Guissard to the swamp of Canet des Étourneaux. For over 12 miles they showed no mercy, cutting down those too slow to flee. Only the swift descent of night saved Saladin and some of his men from total annihilation. The scattered remnants of Saladin's army threw away weapons, armor, and supplies to flee unburdened. Yet the next day, Baldwin's forces combed the swamp, recovering countless items of value, from breastplates to helmets left behind in the enemy's haste. Victory at Montgisard was as miraculous as it was decisive. The spoils of battle, captured tents, and herds of camels were divided among the Crusaders, who returned to Ascalon to celebrate their hard-fought triumph. On November 25th, the feast day of St. Catherine and St. Peter of Alexandria, Baldwin IV's courage and leadership forever secured his place in history. The crushing defeat of Saladin's forces at Montgisard was followed by an even greater trial. For 10 consecutive days, violent rains and bitter cold swept the land, leaving the fleeing army utterly exposed. Their horses, starved and exhausted from the campaign, collapsed. Their armor, discarded in desperation, had offered no protection from the relentless elements. Without food or shelter, many fugitives succumbed to the cold and hunger. Others, unaware of the terrain, wandered into villages or crossed paths with travelers, only to be captured or killed. Even the weakest of locals took vengeance upon the broken remnants of Saladin's once mighty army. Meanwhile, local Arabs preyed upon those left guarding Saladin's baggage at Al-Arish. Terrified by news of the disaster, these guards abandoned their posts and fled, only to be hunted down by opportunistic marauders. The prophecy, "That which the locust hath left, hath the canker-worm eaten," seemed to find its fulfillment. Over the following days, captives from every corner, deserts, mountains, and forests, were brought to Baldwin's forces. Some surrendered willingly, preferring imprisonment over the unrelenting misery of hunger and cold. Baldwin returned to Jerusalem in triumph. After distributing spoils among his soldiers, he gave thanks to God for the divine favor that had secured their victory. For Saladin, the campaign's humiliation was complete. Of the vast army he had led into the Kingdom of Jerusalem, only a handful returned to Egypt, many mounted on camels in disgrace. His great ambition had been shattered, his forces broken, and his reputation stained. William of Tyre likened Baldwin's victory to the miracle of Gideon, attributing it wholly to divine intervention. The Holy Comforter had chosen not the many but the few, ensuring all the glory belonged to God alone. Baldwin's triumph, secured by faith, would be remembered as one of the most miraculous victories of the age. While Baldwin and his forces secured a miraculous victory in the south, the siege of Harim in Antioch unfolded in stark contrast. What began as a determined effort to capture the fortress soon devolved into a tale of indolence and disarray. Rather than maintaining military discipline, Philip of Flanders and his men succumbed to idleness. Games of chance, banquets, and indulgence in other vices took precedence over the rules of siege warfare. Many frequently abandoned their posts, traveling back to Antioch to enjoy the baths, feasts, and other pleasures. This neglect emboldened the defenders, who clung to the hope that the siege would soon be lifted. Despite being pushed to the brink of despair, they refused to surrender their stronghold to what they perceived as a disorganized enemy. Philip himself expressed a desire to leave, complaining that he was held at Harim against his will. His reluctance undermined those few who remained committed to the siege and further demoralized the Crusader forces. The situation reached its nadir when the Prince of Antioch accepted payment from the defenders in exchange for lifting the siege. With Philip set on leaving, the Crusader commanders abandoned the assault entirely, despite the stronghold being within their grasp. Returning to Jerusalem, Philip celebrated Easter before preparing to leave the Holy Land. His memory in the region was far from blessed, marked by failure and frivolity. As Philip departed, the people of Jerusalem turned their attention to fortifying the city's defenses. United by a shared purpose, secular and ecclesiastical leaders established a fund to rebuild its walls, ensuring the holy city would be better prepared for the future. Around this time, Frederick, Emperor of the Romans, reconciled with Pope Alexander, ending a 20-year schism. While disunity plagued the Crusaders in the East, Europe began to heal its divisions in the West. In the year of our Lord 1178, the 5th year of King Baldwin IV's reign, efforts began to fortify the kingdom's eastern frontier. On the banks of the Jordan River, at the site known as Jacob's Ford, Baldwin commanded the construction of a formidable fortress. According to tradition, this was where Jacob crossed the river with his people on his return from Mesopotamia, marking a site of both biblical and strategic significance. The fortress, a marvel of solid masonry, was built with immense thickness and height, designed to withstand the sieges of the age. Within 6 months the structure was completed, standing as a testament to the kingdom's determination to hold the line against its enemies. Yet even as the fortress rose, the region was plagued by lawlessness. Bandits from the mountains of Zebulun, offering refuge to brigands and fugitives, made travel treacherous. They terrorized Christians and Saracens alike, their arrogance unchecked. Determined to end the threat, Baldwin acted decisively. In a swift campaign, he stormed the bandits' stronghold, destroying their haven and scattering their forces. Though many escaped to Damascus, Baldwin's actions brought temporary respite to the highways and villages of the region. Once completed, the fortress at Jacob's Ford was entrusted to the Knights Templar, guardians of the faith and defenders of the kingdom. Yet its strategic importance made it a coveted prize. In less than a year, Saladin would move against the fortress with overwhelming force, forever altering its fate. While the kingdom fortified its borders, a general synod convened in Rome at the Lateran Basilica. Among those summoned were William, Archbishop of Tyre, and other leaders of the Church. Their mission extended beyond the council halls. Efforts were made to secure alliances and marriages that might bolster the kingdom's defense. When the fortress at Jacob's Ford almost finished, news reached King Baldwin IV of enemy herds and flocks grazing unguarded in the forests near Banyas. Lured by the prospect of an easy victory, the Crusaders marched under the cover of darkness, hoping to catch their foes unaware. The Christians reached their target at sunrise, scattering into smaller groups in search of spoils. Yet, unknown to them, the enemy had anticipated the attack and lay hidden, biding their time. When Baldwin and his men entered a narrow, rocky pass, they fell into a trap. From their hidden positions, the enemy launched a sudden and ferocious attack. Trapped and outmaneuvered, Baldwin's forces fought valiantly to repel the assault. Among those who charged to the king's defense was Humphrey, his constable, who leapt into the fray with characteristic courage. Humphrey fought with great valor, shielding the king from harm in the chaotic battle. But as the enemy pressed their advantage, he sustained grave wounds. His men managed to rescue him and retreat, carrying the critically injured constable to safety. The king, narrowly escaping the ambush, regrouped with his scattered forces. For Humphrey, however, the wounds proved fatal. He lingered in great pain for 10 days before passing on April 22nd. His loss was deeply felt, for he had been a stalwart defender of the kingdom. Humphrey was laid to rest with honor at Toron, in the Church of the Blessed Mother of God. His exemplary life and steadfast loyalty were mourned by all. In the wake of the raid, Saladin turned his attention to the newly built fortress at Jacob's Ford. His forces surrounded the stronghold, harassing the besieged with relentless assaults. Yet, in a twist of fortune, a single arrow fired from within the fortress struck down one of Saladin's wealthiest and most influential emirs. The loss sent shockwaves through his camp, forcing Saladin to abandon the siege and retreat. Though scarred by loss, the kingdom held firm. Baldwin's leadership and the bravery of his men ensured that the kingdom endured against the odds, even as the shadow of Saladin's determination loomed ever closer. Saladin's forces, emboldened by previous invasions, once again descended upon the lands of Sidon. Plundering, burning, and slaughtering, they spread devastation unchecked. Saladin himself remained in camp, awaiting the return of his marauding skirmishers. News of the invasion reached Baldwin, who immediately marshaled the kingdom's forces. Accompanied by the life-giving cross, he advanced swiftly to Tiberias, gathering troops from every corner of his realm. From there, he pressed on through Sephet and Nasan, arriving at Toron. From a village perched atop a mountain, Baldwin's army observed the enemy's movements. Saladin's skirmishers, dispersed across the plain, were visible even from afar. The Christians resolved to strike and began their descent. Saladin, alarmed by the unexpected arrival of Baldwin's forces, feared for his scattered skirmishers and the security of his camp. Preparing for the possibility of battle, he ordered his baggage and supplies secured within the walls of a nearby city. Baldwin's knights, riding ahead of the infantry, descended swiftly into the plain. Exhausted from the march, the foot soldiers lagged behind, leaving the cavalry to confront the enemy with only a handful of active support. The Christians met Saladin's foraging parties near the river, engaging them in close combat. By the grace of God, Baldwin's forces prevailed, cutting down many of the enemy and forcing the survivors to flee toward Saladin's camp. Though fatigued and outnumbered, the Crusaders achieved a hard-fought victory, their resolve once again holding firm against the relentless pressures of war. Baldwin's leadership, even at the age of 17, inspired his forces to face the daunting might of Saladin without fear. What had seemed like a promising engagement for the Crusaders quickly unraveled into catastrophe. Buoyed by their initial success, the Christians pursued Saladin's scattered forces, unaware that the tides of battle were about to change. Learning of his men's desperate plight, Saladin rode to meet them. With words of encouragement and unyielding resolve, he turned fleeing soldiers back to the fight. The tide of battle shifted as the enemy regrouped and fell upon the Christians with renewed ferocity. Meanwhile, the Crusader infantry rested, believing victory was theirs. But as the enemy charged with renewed strength, chaos spread through the ranks. Scattered and unprepared, the Christians were unable to rally their forces into formation. Despite fighting valiantly, the Crusader cavalry was outmatched by the enemy's overwhelming numbers. Disorganized and without reinforcements, they faced certain defeat. The army broke apart, and the retreat devolved into a chaotic rout. Trapped in a treacherous defile, the fleeing soldiers found themselves unable to advance or retreat. Some crossed the river in desperation, seeking refuge in nearby strongholds, while others fell prey to the enemy, their fates sealed by the chaos of the retreat. Renaud of Sidon, hurrying to join the fray, encountered retreating Crusaders warning of the disaster. Turning back, he abandoned the chance to aid his allies, an act that many later blamed for the scale of the defeat. Among the captives taken that day were Eudes de Saint-Amand, master of the Knights Templars, whose arrogance and recklessness many held responsible for the defeat. Baldwin of Ramla and Hugh of Tiberias, men of great promise, were also captured, along with countless others. By the bravery of his royal soldiers, Baldwin IV escaped the battle unharmed. The Count of Tripoli also managed to reach Tyre with a handful of companions. Yet the cost of the defeat was staggering, and the scars of that day would not soon heal. Then the newly built fortress at Jacob's Ford, entrusted to the Knights Templars, became Saladin's next target. Encouraged by his recent victories, Saladin launched a siege before the Christians could regroup. The fortress, completed only months earlier, now faced imminent destruction. At the same time, Henry, Count of Troyes, and a retinue of illustrious nobles arrived in the port city of Acre. Among them Peter de Courtenay, brother of King Louis of France, and Philip, Bishop-elect of Beauvais. Their coming offered a glimmer of hope to a kingdom battered by defeat. On learning of the siege, Baldwin called upon every available soldier and summoned the newly arrived nobles to join him. Gathering the strength of the realm, the king prepared to march to the fortress's aid. Before the army could set out, word reached Baldwin that the fortress had fallen. Its walls were razed to the ground, the garrison slaughtered or captured. The Christians' hopes for victory crumbled yet again. This fresh disaster deepened the despair within the Kingdom of Jerusalem. What little confidence had been gained by the arrival of noble reinforcements was shattered. Saladin, now at the height of his power, seemed unstoppable. William of Tyre, chronicler of these events, pondered the divine will in the face of such suffering. Had the Christians grown complacent in their faith, or were these trials a test of their resolve? Whatever the cause, the kingdom stood on the brink, battered by misfortune, yet clinging to hope. The fall of Jacob's Ford marked a turning point in the war. Saladin, encouraged by his recent victories, pressed his campaigns with relentless vigor, striking at Christian strongholds and territories across the kingdom. Baldwin, undeterred by mounting losses, continued to lead his forces into battle. At Montgisard, he achieved a miraculous victory, rallying his men against overwhelming odds. But triumphs were rare, and defeats weighed heavily on the kingdom's dwindling strength. As the war dragged on, the king's health began to fail. His leprosy, once held at bay by sheer willpower, now took its toll. Yet even in his weakened state, Baldwin remained the heart of his kingdom, inspiring his knights and soldiers to hold the line. The relentless assaults tested the kingdom's resolve. The siege of Kerak in 1183 saw Baldwin IV defy his illness to personally direct the kingdom's defense, ensuring the fortress held despite Saladin's best efforts. But by 1184, the toll of war and disease would force Baldwin to seek refuge within the safety of Nazareth. Between 1183 and 1184, Baldwin found himself increasingly overwhelmed by illness. The leprosy that had marked his life since childhood now progressed rapidly, robbing him of sight and leaving his hands and feet paralyzed. Yet his mind remained sharp, and his dedication to his kingdom never wavered. Though some urged him to relinquish the crown and retire, Baldwin resisted. Only when a severe fever struck at Nazareth did he accept the need to appoint a regent. In the presence of his mother and the patriarch, Baldwin named Guy de Lusignan, his brother-in-law and Count of Jaffa and Ascalon, as regent of the realm. Baldwin retained the royal title and the city of Jerusalem, but granted Guy control of the kingdom's administration. To safeguard the realm, Guy swore an oath to uphold the king's authority and promised not to seize the crown or alienate the kingdom's cities and castles. The decision divided the court. Many doubted Guy's ability to shoulder the kingdom's immense burdens, citing his inexperience and ambition. Others, hopeful for change, supported the regent, believing his rise might strengthen their own positions. The realm buzzed with murmurs, each voice reflecting its own aspirations and doubts. For Baldwin, the decision was a necessary sacrifice. Weakened by illness, he placed the kingdom's future in Guy's hands, praying that his regent would rise to the challenge. But in a kingdom already battered by war and loss, unity proved elusive, and the shadows of conflict continued to gather. In 1183, Saladin marshaled his might, gathering forces from across the lands beyond the Euphrates. Armed to the teeth, his legions crossed into the Kingdom of Jerusalem, their ambitions set on conquest and devastation. His army descended upon Scythopolis, an ancient capital of Galilee now reduced to a sparsely settled hamlet. The townspeople, lacking confidence in their defenses, abandoned the citadel, leaving the enemy free to pillage its stores and valuables. Meanwhile, the Christian army stationed at Sephari awaited the enemy's advance with mounting tension. Learning of Saladin's movements, they rallied under the royal standards and marched through Nazareth, descending into the great Esdraelon plain to confront the invaders. Upon reaching the springs of Tubania, the Christians found the enemy gone. Saladin, wary of their advance, had relocated his forces toward Bethsan. Undeterred, the Crusaders pressed onward, determined to halt the enemy's destructive campaign. Splitting his army into raiding parties, Saladin unleashed havoc. Little Gerin, Forblay, and countless other villages fell to the invaders, their fields razed and homes plundered. Highways became treacherous, with knights and soldiers ambushed as they hurried to reinforce the Christian army. Even the heights of Mount Tabor were not spared. Invaders stormed the monastery of St. Elias, but its defenders, fortified within the cloister's towers, repelled the assault. Their courage shone against the onslaught, a beacon of resistance in a land under siege. Yet terror gripped the land. Raiders loomed above Nazareth, their presence causing chaos among those left behind. While the able-bodied had joined the army or fled to the coast, the vulnerable sought refuge in the church, their fear a harrowing testament to the war's toll. Through fire and fear, the Christians pressed forward, driven by faith and duty. The shadow of Saladin hung heavy over the land, but the Crusaders, guided by the life-giving cross, prepared to confront the tide of destruction. As Saladin's raiding parties spread chaos across the land, the Christian army found itself isolated. Fear of enemy patrols cut off vital supplies, and a famine soon gripped the camp. The soldiers, unprepared for a prolonged campaign, had marched without provisions, hoping for a swift resolution. In a race against starvation, messengers were dispatched to nearby cities. Supplies began to trickle in, but the danger of Saladin's rangers loomed large. Many of the convoys, unescorted, fell into enemy hands, their provisions seized or destroyed. Though some supply trains reached the camp safely, the burden of hunger weighed heavily on the army, especially the foot soldiers and coastal allies. Pisans, Genoese, Venetians, and Longobards, who had left their ships to join the campaign, struggled to endure the harsh conditions. Amid the crisis, tensions among the nobles reached a breaking point. Discontent with Guy de Lusignan, the newly appointed regent, sowed discord in the ranks. Petty rivalries and mistrust paralyzed decision-making, allowing Saladin's forces to ravage the region unchecked. Some claimed that Saladin's position, entrenched among rocky terrain, rendered an attack too perilous. Others accused the Christian leaders of deliberate inaction, unwilling to risk a victory that might glorify Guy. Whatever the truth, the chance to confront Saladin slipped away. After 9 days of encampment, Saladin withdrew his forces, retreating unharmed. The Christians, weary and divided, returned to Sephari, their hopes dashed and their faith tested. Yet, even in despair, there were moments of grace. The spring of Tubania, thought Baron, yielded enough fish to sustain the army, a small blessing in the midst of hardship. For the faithful, it was a sign that hope, though battered, still endured. Barely a month after retreating from Christian lands, Saladin struck again. Rebuilding his forces, he crossed into the territory beyond the Jordan, laying siege to Kerak, the fortress known as Petra of the desert. His vast army surrounded the stronghold, intent on bringing it to its knees. Renaud de Châtillon, lord of the region, rushed to Kerak's defense. But the timing could not have been worse. The fortress was crowded with guests celebrating the marriage of Humphrey of Toron to Isabella, the younger half-sister of King Baldwin IV. What should have been a joyous occasion turned into a desperate struggle for survival. Kerak's defenders faced overwhelming odds. Renaud, ignoring the advice of seasoned knights, forbid the villagers from seeking refuge in the citadel. His rash decision left the outer settlement vulnerable, and Saladin's forces quickly overwhelmed it. The enemy swarmed up the mountain, forcing a bloody path to the fortress gates. Only the bravery of a single knight, Ivan, prevented Saladin's soldiers from breaching the citadel in the initial assault. Within Kerak, the situation grew dire. The fortress, though well stocked with provisions, became overcrowded with villagers and wedding guests, including musicians and performers. The dense crowds hindered the efforts of the defenders, turning the stronghold into a chaotic refuge. Saladin's forces tightened their grip on the fortress, bombarding it with siege engines and cutting off escape routes. For the defenders, survival depended on their ability to outlast the relentless onslaught. As the siege dragged on, the stark contrast between the hopes of a wedding celebration and the horrors of war weighed heavily on Kerak's defenders. They faced not only the might of Saladin's army, but also the consequences of their leader's reckless decisions. By late 1183, Baldwin, gravely ill but still mentally sharp, recognized that his faith in Guy de Lusignan had been misplaced. Guy's failures during the campaign at Tubania, coupled with his reluctance to meet the king's requests, had plunged the kingdom into disarray. Taking the advice of his wisest counselors, Baldwin reclaimed control of the kingdom from Guy. Determined to secure the realm's future, he made a momentous decision: to crown his 5-year-old nephew, Baldwin V, as co-king. In a ceremony attended by barons, clergy, and the people, young Baldwin was anointed and crowned in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The kingdom now had 2 kings, one weakened by illness, the other hindered by infancy. Guy de Lusignan, present at the coronation, made no objection. Yet his exclusion from paying homage to the boy king revealed the animosity between him and the court. His dreams of succession were shattered, and his influence diminished. The barons, led by Bohemond of Antioch, Raymond of Tripoli, and Renaud de Sidon, pledged their loyalty to the young king. Though some questioned the wisdom of elevating a child, many agreed it was necessary to secure the realm and prevent disputes over the crown. Amid the uncertainty, one name rose above the rest as the kingdom's strongest hope: Raymond, Count of Tripoli. Wise in counsel and skilled in war, he was seen by many as the ideal regent to guide the kingdom through its darkest days. For Baldwin IV, this act of foresight was his last great effort to protect his kingdom. Though his body failed him, his resolve to secure the crown's legacy burned brightly. The battle for the Holy Land would continue, but the kingdom now had a fragile new hope. As Saladin's siege engines hurled destruction upon Kerak, the defenders found themselves trapped in a nightmare. The enemy showed no mercy, occupying homes, looting supplies, and cutting down livestock brought within the moat. Day and night, the city endured an unrelenting assault. News of the siege reached Baldwin IV, who immediately resolved to act. Summoning the life-giving cross and every able soldier, the king, now greatly weakened but determined, marched to Kerak. His courage inspired the realm, a testament to his indomitable spirit. Crossing the Jordan and the Salt Sea, Baldwin appointed Raymond, Count of Tripoli, to lead the army. Despite his fragile condition, the king's presence galvanized his forces as they closed in on the besieged city. Upon learning of Baldwin's advance, Saladin ordered his forces to withdraw. After a month of laying waste to Kerak, the siege was abandoned and his army retreated. Baldwin continued his march to the fortress, bringing much-needed relief to its beleaguered citizens. His efforts spared the city further suffering, a rare victory in a sea of challenges. With the siege lifted, Baldwin and his troops returned to Jerusalem. For a kingdom on the brink, this moment of triumph brought hope, however fleeting, to those who followed their king's steadfast example. In the midst of Jerusalem's darkest days, William of Tyre, chronicler of the realm, found himself overcome by despair. The disasters that plagued the kingdom seemed endless, and the failures of its leaders weighed heavily on his soul. For 80 years, Jerusalem had been a land of triumph and divine favor. But now, defeat and disgrace had become all too familiar. William, reluctant to recount the failures of his countrymen, considered abandoning the writings of the Chronicles that inspired this episode altogether. Yet, despite his despair, William was urged to persevere. His colleagues reminded him of the duty of historians, to record both triumphs and tribulations, offering lessons for future generations. Inspired by their counsel, William returned to his task. He understood that history's purpose was not to hide from the truth, but to illuminate it, celebrating past glories and learning from present hardships. With heavy heart and steady hand, William resolved to continue his chronicle, praying that brighter days might yet come to the kingdom of Jerusalem.
And so, I shall continue, though my heart is heavy. For as the tides of war ebb and flow, I pray the future may bring brighter days to this sorrowing kingdom. God grant us the strength to endure.
In the closing pages of William of Tyre's chronicle, the enmity between Baldwin IV and Guy de Lusignan erupted into open conflict. The king sought to annul Guy's marriage to his sister, sparking a bitter feud that divided the kingdom yet further. Baldwin's determination to sever ties with Guy was absolute. The patriarch, kneeling before the assembled barons, begged the king to restore Guy to favor. But Baldwin refused, his resentment unyielding. The patriarch, angered by the king's resolve, abandoned the council in frustration. Guy's rebellion escalated as he raided Arab camps that relied on the king's protection, tarnishing the kingdom's reputation and deepening the strife within its leadership. Confronted by turmoil and close to death, Baldwin entrusted the kingdom's care to Raymond, Count of Tripoli. The nobles agreed that Raymond's wisdom and leadership offered the realm its best chance at stability. William of Tyre's chronicle stops abruptly, but the story of the Kingdom of Jerusalem did not end there. Baldwin IV, the Leper King, succumbed to his illness in 1185 at just 23 years of age and was laid to rest in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. His young nephew, Baldwin V, succeeded him but reigned for less than a year before his tragic death in 1186. perhaps due to illness or perhaps not. Following Baldwin V's death, Guy de Lusignan claimed the throne, sparking unrest among the kingdom's barons. His leadership would soon face its greatest test as Saladin, strengthened by years of victories, prepared for a decisive campaign. In 1187, the Crusader army met Saladin at the fateful Battle of Hattin. Outmaneuvered and outnumbered, the Christians suffered a devastating defeat. Saladin captured the True Cross and many of the kingdom's leaders, including King Guy. With the Crusader forces now broken, Saladin turned his attention to Jerusalem. In October 1187, the city surrendered, marking the end of nearly a century of Latin rule over the Holy City. The fall of Jerusalem galvanized Europe. In response, the Third Crusade was called to the Holy Land, led by Richard the Lionheart of England, Philip Augustus of France, and Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire. But that's a tale for another time. William of Tyre's work stands as a vital record of this tumultuous period, a story of faith and ambition, triumph and loss. Though unfinished, it provides a window into the hopes and hardships of a kingdom that, for a brief moment, shaped the course of history. As we conclude this journey into the life of Baldwin IV, the Leper King, and his times, we are left to grapple with a profound question. What exactly does it mean to be a titan of history? Baldwin and Saladin were extraordinary figures, resilient, determined, and undeniably influential. Baldwin, though ravaged by disease, fought with endless courage to defend his crumbling kingdom. Saladin, driven by vision and unity, led with unparalleled strength and strategy. They stood as giants in an era defined by chaos and conflict. William of Tyre's work stands as a vital record of this tumultuous period, a story of faith and ambition, triumph and loss. Though unfinished, it provides a window into the hopes and hardships of a kingdom that, for a brief moment, shaped the course of history. To admire their resolve is not to excuse their actions, but to recognize the indelible mark they left on history. Titans, perhaps, not for what they achieved, but for how they endured, for how they navigated the storms of their time with strength few could muster today. Yes, then, the Leper King and Saladin must both be considered titans of history. As we reflect on their legacies, let us not shy away from the complexity of our history, no matter how uncomfortable it makes us feel. For in remembering the past, we can shape a better future. Let us always question, learn, and seek to understand the days and years gone by instead of forgetting them, not just in their victories but in their flaws. In doing so, perhaps we may yet shape a better tomorrow for us all, where strength is not used to divide, but to unite. Thank you very much for listening, and don't forget to press the like button and subscribe.